Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sporty's webinar. We are very pleased you could join us today for an interesting topic, one we really haven't covered in this way before. It's called Airline Pilot's Guide to Fearless Propeller Flying. For those who may be making a transition or thinking about a transition from the world of turbine and air carrier operations to the world of propeller flying. My name is John Zimmerman. I'm with Sporty's Pilot Shop. I'll be your facilitator today. Thanks again for joining us. Very pleased to have two great presenters with us, two people with the perfect perspective, I think, to guide us on this journey from the world of airline to propeller flying. First up, you'll see at the top of the screen there, if you haven't already, our presenters. In the middle there, Abend, and then on the left, Eric Radtke. We'll introduce them in just a second, but as we're getting settled in, I want to give you a couple quick housekeeping things to keep in mind. First, we are recording this presentation, so if you have to step away or if you miss something, you want to come back and check on it, don't worry, we'll have it recorded. It'll be available in a couple of days at sportys.com/webinars. And you can also check out Sporty's YouTube channel, where you can see all of our archived webinars. Also, webinar is interactive, so we encourage you to participate. We'll have a poll that appears at a certain point today. Please feel free to participate in that. You can answer that directly on the screen. You can also submit questions at any time. So you should see in the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar control panel, there should be an option you see there for questions. Feel free to submit those throughout the presentation, and we'll save some time at the end to try to answer some of those live. If you have questions after the fact, maybe you didn't get your question answered or something comes to mind, that email address on screen, cfi@sportys.com, is a good one to follow up with. That gets you in touch with the flight instructors here at Sporty's and Sporty's Academy. And also stay tuned. This is the first of, we believe, multiple webinars and potentially other offerings on this topic. So if this is something you're interested in and you'd like to see more of, please let us know. All right, so on to our presenters today. Again, pleased to have Abend with us. You probably recognize the face. He's been a longtime Flying Magazine contributor, has written for them for years and years, offering that airline perspective. So he's got a wealth of experience as an airline pilot, but what some people may not know is, at least in my opinion, Les is a small airplane guy at heart. So he's not just a jet jockey. He came up and understands and loves piston engine airplanes and still does to this day. So couldn't think of anybody better to guide us on that. So Les, thank you very much for joining us today. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, John. And full disclaimer, I'm not the expert on this. You guys are. And Eric, my colleague Eric here at Sporty's, will be joining me because I am a current CFI, but I'm not a practicing CFI. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. Especially my airline colleagues that are considering coming back to general aviation. I think that's fantastic. And for any flight instructors that are interested in teaching my colleagues and understanding airline pilot sort of psyche, it's a good thing for you to watch today as well. And for anybody else that wants to know whether I'm still breathing after retirement, quick background: spent 34 years with American Airlines. Very fortunate. I started as in the Oilers seat as a 727 engineer, and then spent the last part of my career as a 777 captain, and a little bit of time as a 767 check airman. So I'm very lucky to have a great career. I retired early. Yes, I know that's some people's question. At 61, that was 2.5 years ago. You can do the math. So anyhow, I'm happy to be here, and it is after 5 o'clock Eastern time. So if you want to grab a beer, please do so, and I'll send it back to Eric Radtke to introduce himself.
Thanks, Les. Appreciate it. As he mentioned, our other presenter today, Eric Radtke. Eric is the president and chief instructor at Sporty's Academy, which is the educational arm of Sporty's Pilot Shop, located there on the runway at the Claremont County Airport in Batavia, Ohio. Eric, a longtime educator and current and practicing flight instructor, but also for a brief period of time had a career as an airline pilot. So comes at it from both sides of it as well. So without further ado, I'm going to step away, and Eric, take it away.
Well, of course, I'm the much lesser known presenter here today, but I want to, thank Captain Abend, Les, as I've come to know him. I've been a big fan of his writing for many years, and was just very excited for this opportunity to co-present. and look forward to Les kind of giving some commentary and of course some a lot of helpful insight. As John mentioned, I do come at today's topic, from some firsthand experience of having been in the airline world and transitioning back to small airplane flying. And even today, I still do corporate business aviation flying. So I move back and forth between the jet world, high altitude world, and the small airplane world on a consistent basis. And here at our flight school at Claremont County Airport, Sporty's Academy, we work with a lot of individuals, probably in your same scenario here, that are transitioning back. So we get to kind of speak day in, day out, and kind of understand the challenges, the questions. And I've come to find out that no two people are alike. So, we're here today, Captain Abend, myself, to offer some generalities, offer some firsthand experiences, offer some potential solutions to some challenges that we've experienced, but by no means is this necessarily a one size fits all. And hopefully we'll inspire or give you some ideas and help identify topics that you can explore in greater detail. So with that, we're gonna kind of kick things off with a little interactivity while everyone's kind of dialed in, tuned in, and we just initially want to get kind of a general understanding of our audience. Of course, we, per the title, we're expecting that we have a lot of attendees out there that are either current or former airline pilots transitioning back, but it certainly wasn't limited. So putting this poll in the field, and we'll give everyone a few minutes to respond, will help give us a general idea of where everyone stands right now. So a good percentage of you so far are currently flying propeller airplanes. That's fantastic. That certainly indicates that you're always willing to learn. About 20% or so current airline pilots getting back, and about the same amount retired airline pilots. So a good kind of even mix in the audience. So I think we'll have some interesting topics and hopefully some value information, no matter what category that you find yourself in at this point. Kind of brief overview of the topics we'll be touching on today. First and foremost, we'll be talking about what it takes to be PIC in the propeller world. Some of you may be current, others are not. So we'll, speak in general terms about what it takes to get back, what it takes to be safe, what it takes to be legal. Not necessarily one and the same, of course. Some key differences of what you've experienced in the air carrier world to what you will experience in the low altitude propeller world. And then we're going to talk, always interesting, some technology, some gee whiz stuff, some gadgets, EFB device, ADSB, some of those technology topics that are really making our jobs as small airplane pilots a lot easier these days. And then we'll talk about some tips for staying involved, staying active, to keep yourself safe, keep yourself proficient. So number one, getting back to PIC, a key element of being legal, of course, and safe is to ensure that you do have a current flight review. You're no stranger in the air carrier world to ongoing proficiency checks, line checks. You've been doing that on an ongoing basis. Those satisfy the requirements of a flight review, which are spelled out in FAR 6156. But to dispel a common, I think, misconception from a lot of people that we talk to at the flight school is that a flight review is a test, it's an exam, it's this pass-fail. There's a lot of jeopardy involved, and it couldn't be further from the truth. There is no such thing as passing or failing a flight review. A flight review is an opportunity to, under the watchful eye and guidance of a flight instructor, to work as a team. To ensure you both feel comfortable with where you're at from a proficiency standpoint, that you're confident with the equipment you're using, with planning for flights in your airplane, and ensuring that, of course, you meet all those qualifications and all those privileges that a pilot certificate affords, because, of course, our pilot certificates don't come with an expiration date. Does not require any form of a knowledge test, and I've never heard of a knowledge test being attempted to be given by a flight instructor, so we're not to worry about a knowledge test. It does, in a very basic regulatory sense, require at least 1 hour of ground training and at least 1 hour of flight training. We won't go into all the details of how you can potentially satisfy, but there are other options for satisfying ground training requirements other than sitting down one-on-one with a flight instructor. A lot of great online training resources. And, you know, I certainly understand, as I'm sure Captain Abend would agree, you know, as air carrier pilots in particular, we strive for perfection. We take a great deal of pride in what we do and in our airmanship. And, you know, so that's not to say that it's not worthwhile preparing as if it's a check ride. I mean, that can certainly be good practice. And while flight reviews are officially required every 24 calendar months, that certainly doesn't mean that that's the bare minimum. That certainly doesn't mean that you can't, you know, participate in a flight review much more frequently. A lot of pilots I know and talk to make it a point to get with an instructor at least every 12 calendar months. And a lot of times that will satisfy a flight review requirement there. Now, beyond the flight review, if you're looking to get back to small airplane flying and carrying passengers, there's some other specific currency requirements with respect to landings. And of course, all of this can be accomplished as part of the flight review. So this can kind of serve double duty. But currency requirements of 6157 do require that 3 takeoffs and landings were accomplished within the preceding 90 days of your flight. And again, this is just if you're going to carry a passenger. And that does have to be in the same category and class of airplane. So you probably, if you're just leaving the airline air carrier world, or if you're active now, you probably have a lot of multi-engine landings in and are current there. But perhaps you may need to get single engine land current on landings. Again, it's 3 takeoffs and landings in the previous 90 days. There is a caveat if you are going to carry passengers at night, and even more specifically, that's 1 hour after sunset to the period of 1 hour before sunrise. You are required to have those 3 takeoffs and landings during that time period, and they do have to be to a full stop. That's one of those quirky things that's specifically outlined in the flight review or currency regulation, excuse me. Now, preparing for a flight review, another common question, if you're going to call and schedule, that begs the question, well, what resources should I access? How should I go about being thoughtful, methodical about preparing, just as you might, you know, for your simulator recurrent? And the answer is there's a lot of latitude. So there are some pros and cons to that. But I think one overarching theme or point I wish to make is that I would encourage all of you to be a very active participant in the flight review process. Because there is a lot of latitude, you get to control, you know, perhaps a lot of what takes place. So if you're arranging for a flight review, if you have a flight instructor contact, or even if you're just cold calling a flight school, I would certainly state up front that you want to be an active participant, and if there are some specific items based on the type of flying you do, make that a part of the process. And if there are some things that you don't get to work on a regular basis, certainly mention that too. Because again, a lot of latitude given to instructors. Essentially, instructors are required to, you know, review general operating rules of Part 91 and, you know, broadly maneuvers and procedures that relate to the pilot certificate that you may hold. So, you know, give some thought to what you may want to work on. Give some thought on how this could be an enriching, valuable experience, and make sure you put those thoughts forward. And I'm certain from my personal perspective as a flight instructor, that would be very much appreciated to be an active participant there. If you want to dive into even more detail, FAA has a dedicated advisory circular, which is very thorough. And it talks about some of the emphasis areas that instructors are asked to, you know, cover on flight reviews, and of course those go right to accident causal factors. In GA airplanes, loss of control is a hot button topic. So takeoffs and landings, of course, traffic pattern operations, that's certainly going to be a focal point. But a lot of other things that you're accustomed to, checklist usage and good briefings and good methodical flight preparation and checking weather, a lot of good skills that you're well versed on that are going to translate very well to the propeller world. AOPA is a great resource for some of those additional topics and information on preparing for flight reviews, as is the FAA safety site at faasafety.gov. And just a quick note, instructors will use or should be using as they evaluate, maneuvers and procedures that are specific to your pilot certificate. They should be using the current airman certification standards, or probably what you recall as the practical test standards. So if you haven't been propeller flying in several years, the ACS, our new acronym, is relatively new. It superseded PTS, and it's a more all-encompassing document. While many of the metrics remain the same in terms of maintaining altitude, airspeed, heading, things like that, the Airman Certification Standards brings in some risk management items that weren't there previously, and they also, which isn't going to be applicable to most of you, but it also brings in some knowledge items that would be tested on a knowledge exam if you were going to a first flight certificate. So it's not necessary that you dive into Airman Certification Standards, but since I threw the term out, I wanted to explain a little more in detail about how that evolved from the old practical test standards, or PTS. What you should expect, again, I already mentioned being an active participant, and it shouldn't be a surprise when you show up to a flight review. That shouldn't, in my opinion, be the first time that you have an idea of how the flight will go. Again, I would encourage you to be proactive and speak to the instructor who would be administering the flight review about a plan of action, what we're going to tackle, what we're going to do, but some common events that are fairly typical of a flight review. And again, this is another focal point that the FAA has put forth is some planning elements. Now, this doesn't mean kind of old school, get the paper sectional out and get a plotter and have to plan a cross-country flight by any means, but general preparation for your flight. The instructor will want to know that you understand the performance characteristics, the capabilities of the airplane, just like you were expected to know in the air carrier world, of course, limitations, emergency items, good thorough review of your POH, your pilot information manual is always good preparation, always good practice. But planning a typical flight and showing, what resources you would go to, what you would consult in order to ensure you can complete the flight safely. You're going to be within weight and balance parameters, performance parameters, making sure you've checked NOTAMs at the airports of intended use, doing all those thoughtful things we would do ahead of each and every flight. And for the actual flight, again, you should have some say in this. But the basic flight maneuvers are going to be fairly routine, some air work, perhaps some steep turns, maybe a stall series and slow flight. And again, traffic pattern ops and landings are a major focal point. So expect to do, several of those. And certainly an emergency or an abnormal procedure thrown in there would all be fair game and fairly common practice in terms of instructor administering a flight review in a small propeller airplane. Shifting gears for a moment to your medical options. Again, always a common question of individuals that are coming back to the propeller world or back to GA for the first time in quite a while. What type of medical certificate might you need? So there is a newer option from the traditional first, second, third class medicals that is available to you now, newish in the last few years, known as Basic Med. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Basic Med, but just the quick review on medical classes. Of course, you're likely, if you're a current airline pilot, you're maintaining a first class medical required for Part 121 flying. Second class medical is required for the Part 135 flying, anytime you're getting paid for your flying services. And it's the third class medical, the least restrictive, that's required for any private type flying. So if you're leaving the 121 world, if you have been away, while there's nothing wrong with maintaining a first class medical, there's likely no longer a need for you to maintain the first class medical. The big savings there potentially with not maintaining the first class medical is no more EKG requirement. Most of the medical requirements, this is another common misconception, are pretty standard across all three classes. The visual acuity is a little bit less on the third class, and again, the EKG is no longer needed for second or third class, so it could potentially save you some money if you don't wish to maintain that first class medical. On to basic med, potentially, there's no longer a need for you to renew your medical at all. If you've held first, second, or third class medical, any traditional medical, prior to July 15th of 2006, so that's quite some time ago, you are able to fly under this new mechanism that the FAA has available called basic med. And if you choose to fly under basic med, or if you choose to fly gliders or light sport airplanes, which have the driver's license medical standard, so doesn't require that at all, you may never have to go back and see the traditional AME again. Now, what we mean by that is if you're going to, stick to personal third-class medical type flying, your personal hobby type flying, you're able to fly under these basic med requirements. There are some aircraft restrictions if you're going to choose this basic med route, and that is the aircraft itself can be equipped for no more than 5 passenger seats, or a maximum of 6 seats. And that's not just carrying passengers, that's actual seats in the aircraft. You are restricted to non-Class A airspace, so that's 250 knots on the speed, and that's a max altitude of 18,000. So no Class A operations. And basic med now extends, it started in the US, but it now extends to even flying down into the Bahamas and Mexico as well. So more and more people are accepting basic med. Now the steps to basic med, and the whole vision for basic med is that in lieu of going to see your aviation medical examiner, you could potentially, in the course of your normal kind of well-being, and in a normal course of maybe seeing your family physician for a physical, whether it's every year or every 2 years, you could accomplish this checklist that was created by FAA along with that visit. So again, it doesn't take a dedicated visit or additional out-of-pocket money to be able to fly using this basic med standard. So steps to utilizing basic med is that you do have to, as a baseline, create or complete a training course. Absolutely free. There's 2 options. There's a training course that's provided by AOPA, or there's a free course provided by Mayo Clinic. And you can search either of those terms, AOPA Basic Med or Mayo Clinic Basic Med, and it'll lead you right there. Fairly short, straightforward class, online course that you can take. You complete that, document that, have a record. And then step 2 is to complete this checklist that we're talking about, which is FAA provided. And it can be done. It's a 2-part checklist. There's a portion that you will complete and attest to as the pilot, and then a portion that your physician and any state licensed physician is capable of completing this checklist with you. And it should be documented, and that's required that you do that checklist every 4 years. The training is required every 2 years. The checklist is required every 4 years. Now, if you're curious, not to distract everyone from the material at hand, but there is a handout section in the GoToWebinar software, and we do have a copy of that basic med checklist if you'd like to take a look and see what it's all about. It is an official FAA form, and there's a few other handouts in there too that you'll see that we'll discuss as they kind of come out. And anytime you're using basic med, at the very least, you do have to have a valid driver's license, of course. And it certainly does not, we're still obligated, of course, like we always are as pilots, to ensure our fitness for flight. And I know that goes without saying for a group of air carrier pilots. A very easy to interpret, easy to follow guide, because we didn't cover all the details. It is available at studentpilotnews.com. Is an online platform that is produced and maintained by Sporties, and we do have a pilot's guide to understanding basic med, plain language, easy to follow, available there if you'd like to check it out following the medical. Now, if you are going to go a more traditional medical route, whether that's maintaining a first class or going second or third class, just as a reminder, and these medical durations have changed in relatively recent times. You get 5 years on a third class medical or 60 months if you're less than age 40, or 2 years, 24 months if you are 40 or over, and that's at the date of your actual medical exam. Now, Sport Pilot, which you may be curious about, or some of you may already be participating in, Sport Pilot, as I mentioned earlier, only requires a driver's license medical standard. So you do not have to go the route of basic med, and you do not have to go the route of a traditional medical certificate if you choose a Sport Pilot route. What is Sport Pilot? In a very basic sense, it's flying airplanes with in the Sport Pilot category, which means a maximum weight of 1,320 pounds or less and a max speed of 120 knots. If you have a current medical and you're choosing to go the route of light sport, you can simply let your medical lapse. There's no longer a need to maintain it. Also in the handout section, we have a kind of a summary of light sport. Unless I know you had wanted to make mention of some light sport elements, so I'll invite you to offer some commentary here.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Not so much light sport elements, but more for those of us that have retired and have now all of a sudden realized that we don't have to get that first class medical and go to the doctor in 6 months. It becomes more of an ego thing, and I got to admit, I confess, it's still an ego thing for me. But unless you plan on potentially doing a Part 121 operation or even Part 135, although that's less of a requirement medical-wise, you potentially put yourself in a jeopardy event if some sort of medical issue does arise, heart issue or whatever it may be. So it's something to consider, the basic med, if you don't ever see yourself going back to flying for hire. It might be something to consider.
That's a great point, Les. Thank you. Now I'm going to let you get into some more fun stuff, some tech talk, some new fancy pilot gear.
Yeah, this is stuff we all want to go out and buy. I'm probably talking on deaf ears for folks that are already involved, my colleagues. But if you're going to get involved with general aviation, you haven't yet. If you haven't purchased an airplane, doesn't matter. This is a great investment. It's a great investment from the standpoint of, number one, you got to communicate in a small airplane. You've got the air noise, and it's much more, it's much louder because you got smaller pieces of aluminum or composite surrounding the cockpit, and then you got that engine that moves that spinny thing in front of you. Makes a lot of noise. So it's a good investment to go into this, and I'll get into this in a minute. I've got a little show and tell if you can see it on camera, but there's active noise reduction and passive noise reduction, and I've got samples of both to kind of show and tell. But one of the most important things is, if you haven't considered this already, is comfort. One of the things here, obviously you see eyeglass friendly. We're all, look at me, I gave up the ship a long time ago with reference to my eyesight. So it's important that the headset still doesn't push into the side of my head. I know it sounds a little silly, but if over a long period of time, it gets a little excruciating, believe it or not. We're all used to, many of us, the molded earpiece, and we can last a long time with that. So there's a lot of considerations beyond that. The weight on your head makes a big difference. How long are your missions going to be? Do you plan along cross country if you decide to buy an airplane or rent an airplane and go cross country? So it's important. Comfort is very important. And the other aspect are the bells and whistles. Most headsets today, the gentleman in the slide here is wearing a Lightspeed headset for what it's worth, and most of them have Bluetooth. And Bluetooth provides you not only the opportunity to listen to tunes. There's also the capability for most headsets to plug in a jack directly into the headset, so you could listen to, if you still have an iPod, to your own music selection. But one of the more important things, and something I use very often, is I can now call clearance via the phone on a non-towered airport. We have the ability now for certain programs to find the local ATC where you can get your clearance directly from that particular tower, and you can do it via a phone and your cell phone. So it's a good feature to have. Let me sort of get into the show and tell here a little bit. I'm sorry if I'm boring people that already know this stuff, but this is the Lightspeed. I have one of these, and my wife has one of these. The gentleman in the picture has one of these, and I find it, you've got the padding up on top. I find it very comfortable, even though it's a full body headset, so to speak. So it's a nice unit. It has great reliability. The company stands behind it. Bose is a tremendous headset as well, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Bose headset. Now here's one. I went the cheap airline pilot route. For those of you who've never bought a newspaper when you were flying, or if you're still flying, I don't know if you'll recognize this, but this is what our passengers used to put on in the back of the cabin to drown out, the white noise of the cabin. And this one's called a QC-15. I don't think Bose makes this anymore, but they have the equivalent. And what I did was I bought the QC, and then this is a company called UFly Mic, so they're getting a little call out here for free. But there's another company that also makes these. But here's a mic that fits directly into the headset, and it works very well. The problem is it doesn't completely cover your ears. So as the headset that's in the slide that you see up front, that does. So you get a little bit of interference, a little bit of ambient noise in there, especially at high power settings for takeoff and climb. With my particular intercom system, if the power switch here on the side is off, you can't hear air traffic control. You can't hear anybody. You can't communicate. So this is technically not what they call a TSO unit, okay, technical standardization unit. This is a unit that's sort of modified. At the end of the day, if you put these all together, you may be pretty close to purchasing a Bose headset that cups the total ear, or the one that you see in the slide that's a Lightspeed. So it's something to think about. It's great for passengers. Passengers love these. And then I was mentioning that we talk about passive noise reduction headsets. This is a company called Clarity Aloft that makes these. And this thing goes on top of your ears, essentially, like so. I hate having things on top of my head. So I was using this for quite a while. It does use these noise suppression earpieces like we did during our walkarounds. And it does reduce the noise considerably, but it's passive, not perhaps as well as the Lightspeed you see in the or a Bose headset that you see that cups the total ear, but it's a consideration. And I use it as a backup. I put it actually behind my seat just in case my Lightspeed for whatever reason fails. But that's what you call passive, and it's a consideration. So. And that's basically most of my editorial on headsets. And now we get into the fun stuff a little bit on iPads. Those of us that have been in the airline business, over the last almost 10 years now, it seems, have been using an iPad, I'm sure, or some form of tablet with JEP charts on it and all our other charts and various company manuals. So the same in general aviation, only we're going to be using that thing called a sectional chart, for those of you that forgot all about those things, and we no longer have to draw that. They take the plotter and the number 2 pencil and go across an actual piece of paper. So it's, as the slide says, it's legal. It just takes a lot of the work and the hassle out of it. I mean, just every type of information is available on these EFBs as iPads or basically whatever the operating system is. So it's pretty good. A lot of airline folks out there are probably going, well, geez, maybe I should just buy paper as a backup, and that was my paranoia. But I'll tell you what I do now. Most of the apps, and we'll discuss apps here in just a little bit, will have the app available to your phone. And in my case, I have an iPhone, and I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but there's an approach plate on there. So I have the same basic data that's on the iPad. And in case that thing goes bad, that iPad goes bad on me, I can at least have it on the iPhone and you know, pinch it to get it wider and so on and so forth. You'll find that if you haven't experienced it already, if you're going to be flying in hot climates, warm climates, summertime, whatever it may be, and you leave the iPad in there, which guilty, it overheats. And the first thing it does is it dims the display to save the iPad, and the next thing it does is it shuts itself down. So it's very possible that you could use that backup, but it's just a potential or something that you may want to consider. So since I've been down that road and had it happen, I figured I'd mention that at this point. Sporty's is a great resource, you know, for operating the iPad in the general aviation environment, and the apps themselves are good. So there you go. Next slide, if you would, Eric. So here you go. Now you have the big dilemma: how much money do I spend? Regular size iPad or the bigger one, or the mini pad? Very often the minis are used if you have real estate in your instrument panel. If you're buying an airplane, of course, the minis are used. But you know, it depends upon your comfort level and what your cockpit's all about. How much space you have in your cockpit. And the next, yeah. And then where do you want to mount it? Do you want to leave it on your thigh? You know, that seems to be the most comfortable position, at least for me in my airplane. The airline folks are familiar with the ram mount, the suction mount. If you've got the space to put it without obscuring your vision, some of these I'm not real keen on, but you know, if you're comfortable with that, by all means, you know, there's all types of mounts. Sporty's is a great avenue. If you remember Sporty's from the old days, they still do the same thing. They have a great catalog of paraphernalia and so on and so forth. So there you go. And now to apps, the four that are mentioned there are pretty much the primary ones. I think there's some others, but ForeFlight is the one that seems to be the most popular for your iPad. Garmin Pilot is one that I use. Flight Plan Go is fairly recent. They had an online program for flight planning, and now they've got into the to the app that Eric can maybe speak more to this on how it adapts to the iPad. And then WingX has been around almost as long as ForeFlight. So it's sort of personal preference. ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot for me work well. I have a Garmin GTX 345, which is a transponder that provides ADS-B in and out. So it talks by Bluetooth and syncs with my iPad and the Garmin Pilot app. So I kind of, since I had a Garmin product, I kind of stuck with Garmin, but it's personal preference. And there's plenty of, I won't go into the weeds on these particular programs and how they operate, but it's a program like anything else and an app like anything else.
And one thing I'll add there, Les, is that all of the providers, all the app providers, and in a lot of ways they do the same thing, but the user interfaces, of course, are a little bit different. So just like Les's comments on headsets, what might feel good and comfortable to me may not be, you know, for you. There's room in this world for multiple, but each of the providers does give you the opportunity to download their apps and test them out, give them a full test drive free. So I would encourage you to do that, and you see which, you know, one is maybe a little bit more intuitive for you. And then each of the developers, you know, they have some of their own training resources and product overviews. So you can, you know, kind of go crazy getting into the weeds and learning a little more. But, you know, just using several of them on, you know, on a flight is probably going to tell you everything you need to know. Yeah,
exactly. Absolutely. Okay, ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. You probably thought I didn't know that. Us airline folks are used to ADS-B, actually it's ADS-C for contract. We had AirLink, for example, going across the pond, and we gave our information from the aircraft, obviously automatically, and then some of the stuff that came in was weather related and other communication. So ADS-B is strictly domestic at this point. And, you know, you may, as the slide says there a little bit further down, it says Big Brother may still be watching. And now that you're flying a general aviation airplane, you know, maybe it's time to be paranoid, but you know what, it's okay. I think the problems outweigh, don't outweigh the benefits because you're able to see traffic. It's not quite TCAS by any means, but it gives you great situational awareness. It tells you the traffic according to your relationship altitude-wise and direction-wise with where the traffic is moving relative to you. So there's a lot of information, almost too much, depending upon how you set your program up. But it's a great tool. Now we'll get a little bit into airspace, and I'm sorry, I don't want to scare airline pilots about airspace just yet, but most airspace, at least where, and we'll get into this, where transponders are required, is where ADS-B is now required as a mandate in 2020. There it is. So the out requirement is necessary now. The in requirement is really the icing on the cake from the standpoint of now you almost get into information you could have obtained via the ACARS from the standpoint of you can get your METARs, you can get your TAFs, you can get it listed on you can get it all on your iPad, or if you have an in-panel mount, like for me, I've got an old Garmin 430. I can get all the waypoint data for the airport, which includes METARs, which includes TAFs, NOTAMs, depending whether that airport offers that particular service. And it's just, it's a fantastic thing to get free of charge. So it's out there. Just going back a little bit, if you don't want to spend the extra money on an airplane you might potentially purchase or an airplane that you're renting, there's a company called Avionics, and they actually mount their ADS-B system in the nav light or in the tail light. So there's some very innovative technology out there that got to the point where it's not terribly expensive depending upon you want. But I highly recommend having the in data for ADS-B. This is a great tool with regard to getting, if you're not going to have a panel mount system or an in-dash type system, you can get tremendous information on your tablet, and that includes everything that's sort of listed here: weather, traffic, your GPS navigation data, and believe it or not, your primary flight display. You see it depicted here in the slide. I'm not sure I'd want to use it if the world went to hell and I was just having to use an iPad to keep the blue side up, but at least it would do that. I'd want to practice this first, but it uses GPS data to give you that primary flight display, and it's pretty accurate as long as you have iPad display for GPS, or in other words, you get reception for GPS. But what they're mentioning here is two pieces of equipment, black boxes, if you will, that are easily portable or placed on the instrument panel. That will talk to your iPad wirelessly and give you this data that you're seeing on this particular slide. I did an article here recently for the magazine with reference to having both the ADS-B weather and Sirius XM weather. I have both, and that was basically my argument. I'll let you read the article. I won't go into big depth on it, but the bottom line is I felt that they both had pros and they both had cons. The pro for XM weather is that you can get satellite on the ground. Those of us that remember, departing on convective days, having real radar and seeing real-time stuff was very important. So with the ADS-B, you've got to be high enough to reach a ground station that has been sent from the satellite in order to see some of this data. So you have to get airborne essentially in order to get this weather data. But an XM subscription is definitely something to consider.
And again, I wanted to mention that a copy of Les's article, which is fantastic in terms of giving you the breakdown in the comparison, the pros and cons, that is available to you as a PDF, originally appearing in the September Flying Magazine in our handouts section. So you can grab that and read that at your leisure. And we won't now get into a prolonged discussion on regulations, but we did want to mention a few regulations that are going to be pertinent to small propeller airplane flying, and maybe some you haven't thought of in a while. And starting with what I call the major Part 91 catch-all when it comes to preparing for your flights, and that's the 91-103. Which in a very basic sense says you're responsible for having all the information that you need for this particular flight. I've yet to really come across anyone that can tell me exactly what that means, but it means get prepared, right? So leaving the air carrier world, you're also leaving dispatch and having professionals that are participate, of course, in that planning process and can offer alternatives. Can provide messaging and tracking along the way. So, a lot more, of course, rests on the pilot. That certainly doesn't mean it's a one-person show. You still have some great resources via the ADS-B network or SiriusXM that Les mentioned. Fantastic resources with air traffic control, and even in the VFR world, VFR radar services, VFR flight following. So you're not in this alone. It doesn't all of a sudden go from a team concept or team game in the air carrier world to you individually. You still have resources available to you even in your single pilot VFR flying. But with respect to how do I get at this information, without calling dispatch or without going to the dispatch office, or without consulting the app that the airline provided to you. A lot of the apps, or all of the apps, I should say, that Les mentioned, give you access to weather information, airport information, NOTAMs, TFRs, the works. There's some fantastic online resources, aviationweather.gov, and there's still the traditional flight service that hasn't gone away. You can still call flight service at the number we all learned in our primary training. You can even now go online, 1-800-WXBrief.com, and get access to the same information, and you can create preferences, and you can essentially guide yourself through these self briefings. And there's a lot of industry talk in the light airplane world of putting a little more structure behind self weather briefings, because quite frankly, the majority of briefings that occur today are really that way, and that's the way even really flight service would prefer it. Because it's customizable, it's unique to you. You can do it at your leisure. You can do it, via your phone. So the takeaway really here is to, spend some time investigating some of these resources and making sure you're hitting the basics, of course, which is going to be weather and airports and all that airspace in between. TFRs right now, they're at top of my mind simply because it's election season, if you didn't know. And that means TFRs that follow the president, that follow the vice president all around the country. They can pop up with little or no notice. So it's always important to be checking NOTAMs. And again, you're likely not flying IFR all the time, if at all anymore. So much of that responsibility rests on you. Another benefit of having access to ADS-B information, whether that's with an installed unit or a portable unit, is part of that data broadcast is TFR information that you can get real time in a pictorial format, so it makes sense exactly where it's located, altitudes, those types of things. So again, spend some time investigating some of these applications would be my key message here to satisfy all those pre-flight information requirements. A note about altitude selections. Remember, VFR world, we're plus 500 now. We're no longer on those cardinal altitudes. It's even or odds plus 500. And a lot of times, or with access to GPS, of course, you're doing a lot of direct to flying. So obstruction clearance, obstacle clearance, a lot of responsibility rests on us, of course. And because you probably haven't spent a ton of time staring at sectional charts, I wanted to make a note that our sectional charts do provide these minimum obstruction altitudes that are based on these quadrangles of latitude and longitude. They round highest obstructions up. So in theory, when you identify or see one of these plotted numbers, 9,700 in the example cited, you are going to clear all obstructions, but maybe not by much. In theory, this could only maybe give you 100 feet of total clearance. Again, a kind of plug for some of the modern charting applications that we have access to. A lot of these will give altitude recommendations and will give you altitude advisory views, where you can look at a side profile view of a selected altitude and know that you are going to remain clear. But even though you're flying VFR now, especially when it comes to departures, that doesn't mean that you should completely or need to ignore charted departure procedures. You as airline pilots, you're accustomed to departure procedures, obstacle departure procedures. There's no reason we can't follow some of that same guidance as VFR pilots. Just like in the IFR world, we should still have a plan. In theory, of course, day VFR conditions, we should be able to see and avoid. But when it comes to night flying, a lot of similarities to IMC flying right there. So, have a plan, have a departure plan for certain, especially in areas that you may not be as familiar with. And there's, plenty of those dangers lurk at low altitude. In a general sense, altitude is going to be your friend, especially when it comes to night flying. So give yourself room, give yourself options. That comes with selecting specific routes and altitudes as well. A note about fuel. Everyone has their opinions and maybe rules of thumb. This is, I think, for me, the 91-151 and fuel requirements, a clear example where legal doesn't necessarily mean safe. And from a legal perspective, we're only required in the VFR world for 30 minutes extra during the day and 45 at night. My personal the minimum is always to have an hour. There was a recent report, a case, a fuel exhaustion case, unfortunately, where the pilot actually had met regulatory requirements, and it was just for minimum fuel, but it kind of illustrated the point that, just a touch off in our calculations, or the weather being a touch off, or having to circumvent an area of weather, you can drain those, those precious reserve minutes very, very quickly. So always have plenty of fuel. Unfortunately, and it's too early to tell whether this is just a function of coming out of some rustiness related to COVID, but far too many, accidents we still read about on a kind of an ongoing basis with respect to fuel exhaustion or fuel starvation. Another kind of sidebar comment is that many of these applications, again, that Les referenced earlier, they give you a lot of great tools for finding good deals on fuel. A lot of self-serve options out there. But if in doubt, of course, land and get yourself some fuel, definitely. And that's kind of a good segue into a general theme that we wanted to offer as part of our presentation, is that coming out of a professional two-pilot crew environment into perhaps some single engine, low altitude, small airplane flying, it's no time to be proud. Take things slow. This is definitely not a sprint. There's not a rush. Enjoy yourself. Consider what differences exist in a single pilot world. That doesn't mean what we've all become accustomed to in terms of crew resource management. Not all of that is lost. There's a lot of principles that still carry over to the single pilot environment. In fact, we've offered another handout that specifically speaks to single pilot resource management and what that really is all about. And I think that will certainly ring true and speak to so many of you coming from the airline world. I spoke to a gentleman, as a matter of fact, this week in this very situation, current airline pilot, but has been out of small airplane flying for, I believe he told me, close to 20 years. And he came in with such a good attitude, I felt, and kind of his first statements out of the gate were, I'm signing up for a minimum of 5 hours of dual instruction as a bare minimum. Whether I feel good after 2 hours or 3 hours, I'm committing myself to 5 hours because I've been out of it for as long as I have, even though he's, of course, active in the air carrier world. And I thought that was just a really good approach, a really good cautious, safe approach. Unless I'll let you jump in here.
Okay. How are we doing on time, Eric?
We're doing well so far.
Okay. This one is always kind of interesting. We've been kind of babied around patterns as airline pilots get vectored into for visual approaches, and now we have to make our own decisions how to get into a traffic pattern. And there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. Radio calls are very important, as it mentions here in the slide, just to give situational awareness not only to yourself but to other people, announce where you are, so on and so forth. That goes without saying. But at the end of the day, expect, as you do on the highway, expect somebody to do the wrong thing, and that'll also help your situational awareness. But entering the pattern is a biggie, and if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Eric. This is standard entry. None of you have forgotten how to do this or are doing it now. That's not a big deal. You know what a downwind or a crosswind leg is. Next slide, if you would, Eric. What I like to do, this is just a sort of a taste of things, is the left-hand alternate pattern entry is a lot of times, if I'm not familiar or comfortable with the airport, I just want to get some situational awareness. Number one, start with the windsock or the tetrahedron, see if I'm just going to pick the correct runway for the wind. And secondly, what's the airport layout? What's the traffic? You notice that the number one is to be 500 feet above. So you can actually go over the top of the airport, get a good understanding of the layout, where potentially your self-serve fuel is, and just kind of get a good feel for maybe there's multiple runways, and understand how it all works, and then enter the pattern. So this is one of my preferred ways of doing it if I'm not totally comfortable. The line up and wait thing, you're not going to hear too often unless you're working out of a tower at airport. And if you are, a lot of times, especially down here in the Southeast in Florida, we've got a lot of student traffic, a lot of student practicing, and the tower as well. Not that they're not competent at their jobs, but expect the unexpected. And even if they clear you to line up and wait, make sure that, like you did with the airline, make sure that that approach end is clear before you're cleared into a line up and wait thing. But most of the time, it's up to you to line up and wait and take off and announce your departure. And where are you going to take this, Eric? Was there something?
Sure, Les. I guess the point I wanted to make is that getting back into propeller flying, I've mentioned some kind of teamwork and some team effort. I think it really can make this experience more enjoyable if you involve your friends, your family, significant others, whatever the case may be. Perhaps other airline pilots in your same situation, or that maybe have kind of made this trek ahead of you. So this is aviation is just a fantastic close-knit community. I don't need to remind you of that, but take advantage of all those resources. I know you've obviously met a lot of friends, acquaintances, have so many connections in the aviation community. Get some input, talk to other pilots about some resources that they are using, some challenges, some triumphs. I think that'll give you some good perspective maybe before you embark on the transition back to the propeller world. And then some of those additional resources you can consider. Certainly, we appreciate Sporty sponsoring today's presentation, and of course, appreciate you considering some of the options and supplies for your small airplanes. And I know Les has some firsthand experience with some fantastic resources from medical, from a legal perspective, from AOPA. So I'll let him give some of that testament.
Well, basically, I know that my colleagues are probably concerned that they're going to fly into the next TFR that pops up, or some sort of airspace violation, and I get it, because guess what? I was there, and I use AOPA's Pilot Protection Services Plus, and it really was a non-event, but I kind of strayed into some airspace, and I noticed it on my iPad, the tracking mode that recorded it. And I confessed, and the FAA FSDO that called me, they were very gracious, and I was proactive by virtue of consulting with PPS at AOPA by saying, what do I do? And they said, well, just take some of the wings courses or some of the FAA courses about airspace, which I did, and that was good enough to check the box, and I promise never to do it again. But if something is more serious, obviously we don't have the union on our side if we're retired. Even with the union, if you do something in general aviation, it's really a good idea for our careers and for if it's our passion after our careers are over, to have some sort of protection. I think it's a small price to pay.
Great advice there, great advice. And as we kind of wind things down, I just want to make a preview that you'll have an opportunity following our presentation to give some feedback. And as we mentioned at the very beginning, this was a brand new topic that we're tackling. We understand it. A lot of airline pilots are considering transitioning back, are transitioning back. So we felt there may be a need or some benefit to some open discussions like this, but we welcome your ideas for future topics. We have some outlined and maybe some more advanced pre-flight planning presentations that we intend to make, but we welcome your feedback when you have that opportunity to let us know what you would like to hear about. And with that, I think we'll invite our facilitator. John is still there, and maybe we have some questions that we could field.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Fantastic presentation. Lots of good comments. Les, you've got some fans in the audience, so some admirers of the picture on the wall behind you for sure, and just some positive comments. Have someone here shared that I'm currently flying for a major airline, and with Les's help, I went from VFR to filing an IFR with a brand new autopilot and having a blast. Go GA flying. So great to see that folks are out there making that transition. A couple quick questions I'll throw out that I think maybe speak to broader topics here. One is, do I need a flight review if I have a current airline sim check or line check?
No, the short answer is no, and that's specifically provided for in the regulations. So a 121 check would satisfy a flight review requirement.
And one here that Eric, maybe you want to speak to, Les, you may have an opinion here as well. What's the big deal about an iPad with cellular versus without? If I'm shopping for a tablet to be my electronic flight bag, what does that mean, and do I care?
I'll try to take this, Eric, and then you can correct me if you would. But if you get a cellular capable iPad, my understanding is, and that's what I have, it allows GPS, and that's really important. So that's the difference. I think the non-cellular is cheaper. You don't need to utilize the cellular aspect of a carrier. You just need to have that capability in the iPad. And Eric, can correct me if I'm wrong, please.
No, absolutely right. I would say, though, if you have an existing iPad that doesn't have that capability, there are options. There are GPSs that you can link up to your non-cellular device, and any of those portable ADS-B receivers that we referenced in the presentations, those also have built-in GPS receivers that you can use as your GPS source.
I'll give one shameless plug here, guys, just because it popped up in a couple questions. But on headsets, one thing we do here at Sporty's, we have what we call a test flight guarantee, which is basically you have 60 days to try a headset, fly with it, see if you like it. And if it doesn't work, you can exchange it or get a refund. And obviously, we'd love to sell you a headset, but I bring that up more because I think something you said, Les, that makes rings true for me is that headsets are very personal, and some people just, the way a certain brand or style fits your head or your ears is not going to be the same for somebody else. So whoever you buy it from, I do think the try it and fly it is the best method. If you're used to wearing lightweight, if you've been wearing a Telex Airman headset for 30 years and you have not worn a full coverage headset in a while, I'd encourage you to, try it. If you're thinking of a Bose headset, get it, take it up for a flight in the airplane, the piston airplane you're going to be flying, and give it a shot, because there's just no substitute for that. You can't, stress out over features and comparison charts forever. At a certain point, the best thing is just to give it a shot.
I'll also mention, if you're sticking with, a legacy headset of some sort, that has some special meaning to you, you can also there are also refurb options. If you haven't replaced ear seals in a long time, if you had an old headset sitting in a flight bag, at least consider upgrading or freshening up ear seals, or a big one, the headband. You'd be amazed at what a difference those minor upgrades can make.
Been there, done that.
Maybe time. Maybe time for one more, guys. A lot of good questions on kind of that iPad space again, and this one relates to those add-ons. So if I've got an iPad, talk to me about Sentry and Stratus. This specific question is, what do these provide besides a location? You mentioned some of this with traffic and weather, but maybe walk through those. If I've got an iPad with my charts on it, what do I get? What features are enabled by adding a receiver like a Sentry or a Stratus?
Yeah, I don't operate with that equipment. I've only done it briefly, so if Eric is more familiar, I'll defer to you, Eric.
So sure. So primarily, it's being able to receive that ADS-B broadcast, which is a ground network, government sponsored. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to subscribe. You just get it. You just kind of turn it on and it works. And through that ADS-B broadcast, you get weather. You're going to get traffic information. There's some caveats to that, but you're going to get traffic information. You're also going to get the GPS position source, so you're going to get location. And there's some other cool features. Some of these devices have backup AHAR, so you get an artificial horizon, digital speed, attitude information. You can also, in the case of the Sentry, have a carbon monoxide detector. So GPS, traffic, weather are the mains, but you also get a couple of those other kind of neat safety features.
Yeah, and
I wonder. I'm sorry, John. I wonder if it's important to mention that maybe some folks don't know that in order to get charts, it is a subscription. Charts, approach plates, and so on and so forth. I think it's important for folks to know that if you subscribe to a certain service, most of them provide the NOS service. If you want to upgrade, it's a little more expensive. You go to the JEPs that we're all familiar with in airline flying, but that's another part of that of the app and the use of the iPad.
Great. I think we're about out of time, so I am going to wrap it up there. Thanks for all the questions, everybody. I've tried to answer a couple of those in the background as well. Thanks very much to Les and Eric. Fantastic presentation. If you haven't already, grab those handouts there in the GoToWebinar control panel. Check out those additional resources there on the screen, and give us that feedback in that survey that'll pop up here as you leave the webinar. And I hope to see you again on a Sporty's webinar in the future. Again, sportys.com/webinars for the recording of this and for future webinars. All our attendees, Les and Eric, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.